Hi, I'm Dr. Rakesh. I work with Dr. Sam, Dr. Emma, and Dr. Tracy in the Sam Bunting Clinic at Harley Street. Today, I'm going to talk through how to understand sunscreen labeling. I guess the first question to ask is, why would you use a sunscreen at all? So the sunscreen protects you from burning, but it also protects you from photoaging. And a lot of the signs of aging that we experience as we get older is from the sun. And so using a regular sunscreen can help prevent those features. The sun is made up of lots of different wavelengths of light. There's the visible light that we see. As you move into shorter wavelengths, you go from blue light to UVA. Then you have UVB. Most UVC light is filtered by the ozone layer. So that's not normally of the concern when it comes to protecting yourself with a sunscreen. So labeling. Number one, UVB protection. UVB causes burning. And so when sunscreens were first developed, the idea was to prevent burning. And this is determined by a sunscreen's number. So on the bottle, usually on the front, it will have in big numbers either somewhere between 6 and 50 plus for most manufacturers. What this tells you is the number of times longer you can stay in the sun without burning. So for instance, if with your skin, you would normally burn if you were out in strong sunlight for 5 minutes, and SPF 2 would mean that it would take you 10 minutes to burn. That is twice as long. Similarly, if your SPF value is 10, in theory, you could stay out 10 times as long. So if you burn after 2 minutes, that would be 20 minutes it would take you to burn. That's how the rating goes. Now, that only works for so far. For instance, if you have an SPF rating of 50, whilst of course in a lab environment where it's tested, you could stay out for 50 times as long. In real life, you often sweat the SPF. Some SPFs, especially that have chemical ingredients in, do degrade in the sun. And so you can't expect to be out for 50 times as long with a single application of an SPF 50. That's the reason it's often recommended that you reapply your sunscreen, especially if you're on holiday, every 2 to 3 hours, because most of that may sweat out or it may come off in the pool. So that is your UVB rating, the most important because that's what prevents you from burning. Not to be underestimated is the UVA rating. And this is where things can get a little complicated because different countries have different rating systems for the UVA protection. So let's start with Europe. In Europe, there is a sign with a UVA with a circle around it. This demonstrates that it has UVA protection. Now, unlike UVB, it's not a linear scale. What it means is that UVA protection is a third of the amount of the UVB protection in that product. Now, what does that mean? That means if you have an SPF 50, your UVA protection is going to be very good. However, even if it has this symbol on, and your UVB protection, let's say, is 5, your UVA protection is not going to be very good because it'll be a third of 5. So it's a relative scale related to the UVB protection. That can be quite complicated. But as long as you stick to some protection factors that are 30 to 50 or 50 plus, as long as it has that UVA in a circle, you'll be protected from UVA. Now, in other countries, they use different scales. So the commonest scales will be the PA in a circle, and that is a plus scale, and it ranges from 1 plus to 4 pluses. This is a mark of how easy it is for your skin to darken or pigment. So I would recommend you look for a plus rating of between 3 or 4. In the UK, there's also a star rating that runs from 1 to 5, and I'd recommend you look for a star rating of 4 and 5. These all demonstrate that there is a UVA protection. In America, there's something called a critical wavelength, which will be a number with an NM standing for nanometers next to it, and often a inverted sigma. The commonest symbol will be a wavelength sign with a 370 nanometers next to it. Now, what does this mean? This means that for the majority of UVA, which runs from 320 nanometers to 400, 90% of the sunlight is absorbed up to 370. So that means only 10% of the light penetrates your skin within that range. And that's their way of demonstrating that it has UVA protection as well as UVB protection. Another symbol you might look for is the words broad spectrum sunscreen. Broad spectrum means that it has both UVA and UVB protection. So having a sunscreen that has broad spectrum labeled on it is something else you should look for. There are some other labels you might want to look for. One is high energy visible light, or HEVL protection. This means that it protects you against visible light in the blue spectrum. Now, for some people, this wavelength of light can cause pigmentation, especially if you're prone to pigmentation conditions like melasma. Standard sunscreens that protect you against UVA and UVB don't necessarily also help protect you from pigmentation in this wavelength. And so some sunscreens will provide visible light protection. These are often tinted because they have iron oxide in them. Those are the most important things to look out for. There are other additional things that you may wish to try. First of all is, what type of sunscreen would you like to use? The two most popular types would be mineral or mixed. The two ingredients are mineral sunscreens ingredients. That really means zinc oxide, titanium dioxide. Now, you may want to use a mineral-only sunscreen if, for instance, you have very sensitive skin, because sometimes the chemical ingredients can irritate your skin. They give really good broad protection. They don't block pores. And these days, the mineral sunscreens often don't leave a white mark, which is not the case compared to the mineral sunscreens that were available, let's say, 10, 15 years ago. The vast majority of sunscreens will be a mixture of chemical and mineral sunscreen ingredients. For the majority of people, you'll be able to tolerate that well. And the advantage of this for you is that there is more selection to choose from. They're often more cosmetically elegant and lighter, and they usually provide very good sun protection. And that's back to the SPF number and the UVA rating, which I just discussed. Sometimes you may want to use a SPF that is water resistant, especially if you're going on holiday and spending a lot of time in water. You may want to use something that's sweat resistant, especially if you're going to play sports. And mineral sunscreens are particularly good for sports because they don't interact and they don't block pores. You may want to consider how your sunscreen is delivered. Now, what do I mean by this? Sunscreens come in many different formulations. Most of them that are sold in the UK come as a cream formulation, but that's not going to suit everyone, especially if you have oily skin. You may want to consider one that comes in a gel formulation or a spray, and that can be either as a pump spray or an aerosol spray. Now, aerosol sprays are more designed for the body and not the face. For kids, you may find that a spray is much easier to use than trying to pin them down and use a cream on them. And there'll be formulations that are specifically designed for very sensitive skin, and often the children's versions in certain ranges will be specifically designed to have the least amount of irritants in them. So I hope this has given you some hints and tips about how to pick your sunscreen and what all the labels mean on your sunscreen to make a better choice for your sunscreen. But remember, the best sunscreen is going to be the sunscreen that you use all the time. Thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you at the next video.